We're studying community ecology. So far, we have learned about interactions between organisms and relationships between organisms. We've learned about energy transfer in ecosystems. Now we're going to study diagrams that illustrate who eats who in an ecosystem. First, food chains. A food chain is a linear series of feeding relationships in a community. This is a food chain. It's a very simple diagram showing who eats who in an ecosystem. All energy from Earth starts with the sun. Plants capture that energy, and that energy gets transferred through the community. The arrows point in the direction of energy flow. They point into who is doing the eating. Take a look at this food chain. What would happen if the grasshopper went extinct? If you predicted that the mouse, snake, and hawk would starve and the plants would overpopulate, you'd be right. Now on to food webs. Food webs are a visual map of feeding relationships and energy flow in an ecosystem. They're more complex and more realistic about what goes on as far as who eats who in an ecosystem. This is an illustration of a food web. You can see it's far more complex. Organisms feed on more than one thing in an ecosystem, so it's more realistic as to what is happening in an ecosystem. And the arrows still point into whose tummy the food is going into. Predict what you think might happen using this diagram if the grasshopper went extinct. The mouse would be impacted the most because the mouse feeds only on the grasshopper. Everything else has something else to eat in the ecosystem. So the populations of the others might decline, but they wouldn't go extinct. Last, I want to talk about keystone species. A keystone species is one in a community that has a strong impact on the health and the stability of the community. Stone describes a stone in architecture that's used to stabilize a structure, especially an arc like you see here. An example of a keystone species is the sea otter. The sea otter almost went extinct in the early 1900s because it was hunted for its pelts. And what happened is that its prey, the sea urchin, started to increase in population size. So the increased sea urchin population started to eat all the kelp. And that caused the kelp to die off. Then the sea urchin didn't have any food, so the sea urchin started to die off. So just the removal of this one species led to the collapse of the entire ecosystem. Keystone species is one that keeps a community stable. We've learned today about food chains, food webs, and keystone species.
Created using Powtoon.